we see a lot of people in a lot of places somehow think that they know best. They know better than the rest of us how our lives should be led. They know better than the rest of us how we should act and how we should react. They know whether or not we should have gas stoves or have a car that has a combustion engine. They always seem to know what's best for us. And it's amazing to watch places like California continually invest in this argument, this anti-American, anti-pursuit of happiness, anti-freedom argument, and how successful they were with AB 5, so successful, in fact, that they now want to bring it to the rest of the country with the PRO Act. Yeah, it's making its way back. Thank goodness Republicans have control of the House. But now you know why it's so important. Guys, welcome to the show, presented by Americans for Prosperity. AmericansForProsperity.org, economic liberty and free speech. That's where it's at. Casey Mattox joins us right now. He is actually the vice president for legal and judicial strategy at Americans for Prosperity. And that's not why I brought you on the show. That's my deal with AFP is quite clear on the sponsorship, but you had the right article, man. It's something we've been discussing for a while. Gavin Newsom shouldn't get to decide which businesses survive, and neither should Congress. It's an article you have, a piece you have up at AmericansForProsperity.org. Get everybody caught up, Casey. Talk to me about what AB 5 was in California and what its real world effects were.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on, Tony. So AB 5 and now the PRO Act that some folks are trying to push in Congress is basically a law that says that that would eliminate what's called the gig economy, right? Which is basically where people are able to be Uber drivers and Uber Eats and all these sorts of things that people are able to do without having to go work for a traditional employer and have a traditional employment relationship. People have figured out that there's a lot of ways that we can do work, and that's really freed a whole lot of people to be able to make ends meet and be able to to do the things, to be able to have the kind of work life that they want to be able to have. California didn't like that. California wants to force everybody into one system for how we're going to work, and that system is basically, no, you got to work for somebody. You need to work for an employer, and that employer needs to have a system for how we're going to do work. And so they passed AB 5 to basically do that, to sort of force everyone into that kind of traditional employment relationship. And then, of course, they realized that, there are problems with that. There are reasons why, and particularly there are problems because there are powerful constituencies that could lobby for an exemption. So you have AB 5 that sort of sets this, we're going to have one way that everybody has to work rule, but then they have like 100 different exemptions. And those exemptions are basically, if you are a powerful enough lobby to say, whoa, timeout, doesn't work for our people, then you get exempted. And if you weren't a powerful enough lobby, then you're not exempted. And so that's sort of the situation in California now, and it basically could become the situation nationally.
So we see that with the banks. If you're connected to the right people, you get a bailout. But if we don't think you create systemic risk, well, then you're out of luck, and that's why people are pulling deposits from smaller regional banks into larger banks. But take a step back with me here. This is about unions, AB 5. What was done was put forth as the idea that if you wanted to, let's say Tony Katz, who wants to write for TonyKatz.com. I couldn't actually hire you in California to do freelance work because I'm not offering you full-time work plus benefits, and you're not a part of a union. In the end, it wasn't about all the other things. It was about you as a citizen stroking a check for union dues. True or false?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically true. Look, I mean, this is California is trying to create a situation where you filter everyone into a situation or into a work situation that sort of pushes you into a union and empowers those unions. So then they start creating these exceptions to those rules. You have the exceptions sort of make it so that the law doesn't even make sense on its own terms. And that's kind of what we're left with. And, fundamentally, you have, there are a whole lot of problems with this, right? But fundamentally, you end up with free speech problems, like the situation I was writing about here, where if you're going door to door and you're trying to sell things door to door in California, well, then you're exempted from AB5. You can totally do that. You can go be an Amway salesman. You can do whatever door to door in California. You don't have to go, be in a traditional employment relationship to do that. But if you want to knock doors and actually advocate for a political candidate, well, that's no longer marketing. That's a different thing, and you're not exempted. If you want to go knock doors for political candidates, then you need to work for the man. You need to have a sort of unionizable job in California. That doesn't make any sense, right? It's exactly the same thing. You're advocating for something else. Are you advocating to sell something? Well, then you're fine. If you're advocating for political speech, then that's a different thing. And that's a fundamental First Amendment problem where the government is saying, well, the rules depend upon what you're saying. That's a fundamental First Amendment problem that California has.
Talking to Casey Mattox, Vice President for Legal and Judicial Strategy at Americans for Prosperity. One of the things that you write about is when this came into effect in 2019, or it was passed into law in 2019. It came into effect, Casey, in 2020. How did it affect the California economy between when it went into effect and now?
Yeah, I mean, well, California has not been doing great, right? I think it's well established the problems that California has had, and I think that is at least partly attributable to this problem. When you make it difficult for people to be able to work and to be able to earn a living, the impacts are obvious, and I think that's California's gotten part of what it asked for out of this. You make it hard for people to work. It turns out that's difficult for your economy.
Now let's move it forward a little bit, Casey, because you talk about in the article that among the losers are free speech, and certainly you talk about it from the political side. But how about the idea that I want to be a part-time bartender for weddings? Right? It's a great place to pick up chicks. I'm totally in. I'm done. I'm good. I want this in my life. AB5 said no. Yeah. You don't get the opportunity to do that. You don't have the opportunity to earn some extra scratch. Isn't that also a free speech violation?
Yeah, I mean, there are free speech problems all the way through this law, right? I mean, the case here is mobilize the message, and it's sort of obvious when you're dealing with those situations. But yeah, I mean, we filed a brief before in the prior version of this case where, look, this is having implications across writers and bloggers, and certainly situations like that where kind of the broader work world, when government is picking winners and losers, and particularly when it's picking winners and losers based on what you're saying, that's a fundamental First Amendment problem.
Now we get into the part two of this case. You're talking to Casey Mattox, Vice President of Legal and Judicial Strategy for Americans for Prosperity. As you discuss, there's something called the PRO Act, which is the idea of taking AB5 and bringing it to a national level. Who is pushing this forth? Is it Gavin Newsom reaching out to U.S. senators saying, hey, this is awesome. You should totally do this? Was this other Democrats seeing this and saying, you know what? We absolutely are desperate to curtail the rights of people. And as a follow-up, do they get that they're curtailing rights, or does pushing the union come before all things?
Well, I mean, so you have members of Congress from California that are, of course, strongly supportive of AB5 and trying to push to bring California's experience to the rest of the country. But as you said, this is also an issue driven by people who want to be able to secure to sort of funnel people into traditional work relationships where they can then unionize people and push them into those union relationships, right? So, and kind of fund the causes that they want to fund through those, through those unions. And so, certainly that's a big driver of this, that sort of nationwide effort to try to push people into one way of working so that you can connect them to to unions, which can then collect funds and be able to use that for political causes that people want to use them for.
As you see this playing through, this doesn't get through a Republican House. I think that's pretty obvious. But even with losing the House of Representatives, as Democrats did in the midterms, they don't seem to be what's the word I'm looking for? Stymied, Casey. They don't seem to be like, all right, maybe we won't push on this. They seem desperate to keep this going. Are there no Democrats out there at all who have said, you know what, this is a really, really terrible idea. This is a loser politically. We should not be in favor of this. We shouldn't even be bringing this up at all.
Well, I think this is, they need to hear from people around the country. I mean, we have a place on our website you can go and get connected to just communicate with your members of Congress and let them know that you're opposed to these plans that would make it harder for people to work. They need to hear that message, and don't take for granted that people are going to be understanding the problems with this. I think we need to make sure that they're hearing from people who would be negatively impacted by this. And that's frankly anybody. I mean, it's all of us, right? Because we all are benefiting from a gig economy that allows people to go and do small time jobs and to be able to do Uber Eats and all these other things, right? That are an important part of the life we're all living now, especially in a post-COVID world, right? We've all sort of gotten more used to that sort of effort. And in the current economy, frankly, all of us need to figure out ways that we can, have sort of the side hustles, right? And so I think, I would encourage people to reach out through our website, contact members of Congress, and let them know that you're opposed to the PRO Act, because I think there is going to be there's certainly going to be people who are continuing to push this narrative and sort of Californianize the rest of the country.
Let's talk for a moment about unions. Talking to Casey Mattox, Vice President of Legal and Judicial Strategy at AmericansForProsperity.org. Let's talk this union talk just for a moment to get maybe a better understanding of the strength, because it seems pretty obvious that unions have an incredible stronghold on the political left, and you got to get the unions on board. And if there isn't a union endorsement, that's the big story, as if the union endorsement is de facto always going to happen. And we see the size of teachers unions in Chicago. We talk about union strength in California, as you are, Casey. The question is it possible to break the unions? Clearly, this talk in California is about growing unions. But the questions that we discuss, especially when we talk about things in education, is how do we break the unions? Even the conversation about police unions, if they're going to be protecting bad cops, there's conversations about we need to put an end to this union so we can maybe get to the meat of the matter. In your experience, exactly how strong are these unions, and how beholden is the Democratic Party or any political party to them?
Yeah, I think it depends upon the area, right? And I think people have become very attuned recently to the problem of public sector unions, especially. And you talk about teachers unions and things like that. I think that's an enormous problem, because it's sort of directly unionizing the people who are the public servants, and that raises a whole separate set of problems. But look, fundamentally, it's a question of compulsion. When you're compelled to join unions and you're compelled to give for political causes, that is, you're forcing people. It's not a voluntary association. People want to present this as a voluntary association. If I'm forced to actually join a thing in order to work, and I'm forced to pay for those people's political expression in order to work, there's no voluntary association in that. And I think the answer to the question is, look, it's one thing if what we're talking about is people voluntarily associating. That's what the First Amendment protects. It's an entirely different thing when we're talking about being compelled to do something. And that's fundamentally what AB5 and what the PRO Act are attempting to do, is another way of trying to force people into not just one way of working, but force people into a situation where you are compelled to join a union and compelled to be able to contribute to political causes in order to be able to work.
Casey Mattox, Vice President of Legal and Judicial Strategy at Americans for Prosperity. I appreciate taking the time to be with us, and I appreciate all of you who joined in on Rumble and are watching. Don't forget to subscribe on Rumble. It's good for you. It builds character, and when you're there, you'll see the way to join up on Locals, TonyKatz.com or TonyKatz.locals.com, and be a part of what we're building and what we're growing. And I will catch you next time, guys.